My neighbor and my husband planned to put me in a home, so they could be together. They say madness comes slowly, like shadows stretching at dusk. But for me, it came in teaspoons. Bitter ones. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was standing at the stove, stirring the morning porridge. It was a peaceful day in Charleston, the sun slanting in through the curtains just the way I liked. I'd always been sharp, organized, a woman who balanced checkbooks and remembered birthdays down to the last cousin. But that morning, I felt off. I reached for the cinnamon and instead grabbed the pepper. My hands trembled as I stirred, the smell burning my nose. Still, I didn't say a word. Not when Gregory walked in with that usual half-smile, not when he kissed my forehead absently and said, "You all right, sweetheart?" I nodded. Of course I nodded. What else do you say when your brain begins to feel like a maze? A week later, I left the stove on. Flames licked at the pot, and smoke set off the alarm. I don't even remember turning the burner on. But Gregory, he looked frightened. Not angry. Not blaming. Just concerned. "Helen," he said gently, "you've been forgetting things lately." I wanted to deny it. But then I couldn't find my purse. I'd put it by the hall stand, I always did. And yet, it turned up in the fridge. In the goddamn fridge. That's when I started doubting myself. My name is Helen Mayweather. I'm 70 years old, a retired schoolteacher, wife of Gregory Mayweather, CEO of a booming real estate empire, and apparently, losing my mind. That same evening, she came over. Madeline Jameson. My neighbor. 40-something, always polished, always scented like lilies and manipulation. She brought us cranberry scones and 2-sweet tea and sat on my couch like she belonged there. "How are you feeling, Helen?" she asked, eyes wide with fake concern. "Gregory said you've been having some little spells." I blinked at her. Spells? I wasn't a child or a storybook witch. But her voice was laced with sugar. "I'm fine," I said tightly. She leaned forward. "It happens to all of us. Aging is cruel, isn't it?" I wanted to throw her scones right back at her smug face. But I didn't. I smiled instead. My mother always said, when a snake comes bearing gifts, let it show its fangs first. Madeline started coming over more often. Bringing casseroles. Organizing Gregory's files. Helping him pick out suits for his meetings. I watched from the staircase one morning as she adjusted his tie, her hand lingering too long. He chuckled nervously. "Maddie, that's shoo," she said, "you'd forget your head without me." And Gregory, he just smiled. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Then came the doctor's appointments. Gregory insisted. "Just a precaution, Helen. You've been confused lately. I want to make sure everything's all right." So I sat under the cold fluorescent lights while a neurologist asked me what year it was. Who the president was. How many fingers he was holding up. I answered everything right. Still, they scheduled a follow-up. "Just to be safe," he said. One night, after dinner, I opened my medicine cabinet and noticed something strange. One of my pills looked different. Same bottle. Same label. Different color. I held it up to the light. When I asked Gregory about it, he shrugged. Maybe the pharmacy changed brands. But I'd been filling those prescriptions for years. They'd never changed. That night, I didn't take the pill. I flushed it instead. And that's when clarity came like lightning. The next morning, my head was sharper. I remembered the grocery list. I didn't lose my phone. I followed the recipe exactly and made perfect lemon bars. No tremors. No confusion. Nothing. I waited until Gregory left for his meeting with Madeline, then I pulled every bottle from that cabinet. 3 pills had been tampered with. Different colors, different imprints. Someone was drugging me. My heart pounded in my ears. This wasn't age. This wasn't memory loss. This was sabotage. And I had a suspect, too, actually. By the end of that week, I began documenting everything. Quietly. I bought a small journal and kept it hidden in my sock drawer. Every time Madeline visited. Every time Gregory left the room and my tea suddenly tasted faintly bitter. Every misplaced object. Every senior moment that felt a little too convenient. They were painting me as senile. But why? Then I overheard them. Late at night, Gregory's study door cracked open just enough for whispers to leak out. "She's getting worse," Madeline's voice purred. "It's only a matter of time." Gregory sighed. "I don't know if I can do it, Maddie. She's my wife." A beat of silence. Then her voice, sharp as broken glass, "She's your past, Greg. I'm your future. Don't let her ruin that." My knees buckled. I nearly cried out. But I stayed quiet. I walked back to bed like a ghost. Now I knew the truth. My own husband, the man I trusted with my life, was being led by a viper in silk. And she wanted me gone, locked away in a care home, labeled insane, so she could slide into my place, my bed, my life, and most importantly, my husband's millions. But if Madeline Jameson thought I was going down quietly, she was about to learn what happens when you try to bury a woman who still has claws. If you're still here, thank you for listening to my story. Before I go further, I want to ask, have you ever trusted someone, only to feel them turn on you so slowly you questioned your own sanity? Let me know in the comments. And please, like, share, and subscribe. Tell me where you're from too. I want to know who's out there listening. Because the next part of my story? It gets even darker. The morning after I overheard their whispered betrayal, I woke up determined to fight, but played dumb like always. That's the thing about people who think you're weak, they never expect you to be watching. I served Gregory his breakfast like nothing was wrong. Eggs sunny side up, toast lightly buttered, just the way he liked. He smiled at me, his eyes warm but tired. "You're looking better today," he said. Less confused. I forced a soft laugh. "Maybe you were right about the pills. Maybe I was just stressed." He nodded, completely unaware that I had flushed every last one of those swapped tablets down the toilet. I wasn't confused, I was poisoned. And I wasn't stressed, I was betrayed. Madeline didn't come by that morning. Maybe she thought I was slipping too far to notice. But I noticed everything. I noticed that the hall mirror was tilted again, off-center by half an inch, something only I would catch. I noticed my diary had been moved slightly in the drawer, as if someone had read it and carefully placed it back. I noticed the spare key under the porch was gone. I was being watched, tested, and studied. But they didn't know I'd caught on. That afternoon, I decided to test them. I put on my old brown coat, one Madeline always mocked, and pretended to leave for a walk. I said it loud enough for Gregory to hear, then stepped out the front door and circled around to the back, slipping in quietly through the basement entrance. I waited in the shadows, not moving, not even breathing too loud. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Her voice floated through the air. "She gone?" she asked. "Yes," Gregory said, "just for a walk." "Why?" "Then we need to talk." I crept up slowly and stayed just low enough to see them in the hallway. Madeline had her hand on his chest. "She's going to burn the house down next time," she said. "Or forget the stove again." "What if something happens while you're at work?" Gregory rubbed his temples. "I'm just not ready to send her away yet, Maddie." "Greg," she said in that honey-dripping tone, "you can't keep her here. She's not safe. For you." Then her voice dropped into something even colder. "And for us." "Us?" I should have screamed. Should have burst in and torn her wig off her pretty little head. But I didn't. I backed away. I had what I needed. I had intent. Now all I needed was proof. And believe me, I was going to get it. That night, something else happened. Something that nearly broke me. I was brushing my hair in the bedroom mirror when the door to my room slammed shut behind me. I jumped. Walked over, turned the knob. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. Locked. From the outside. I knocked once, twice. Then I yelled. Gregory? The door stuck. No answer. I pounded harder. Still nothing. Panic started rising in my throat. I ran to the window, but the security bars, once Gregory installed for safety, were locked tight. I was trapped. In my own bedroom. I sat on the bed, breathing shallow, trying to think. This wasn't an accident. Someone locked that door. She locked that door. But why? A test? A warning? An experiment to see if I'd break? An hour passed before I heard the key turn. Gregory stepped in, all innocent confusion. Helen! Why didn't you call out? My voice shook. I did, Greg. I screamed your name. He frowned. I didn't hear anything. He kissed my forehead and said maybe I'd imagined it. Said maybe I'd had a little episode. I nearly slapped him. But instead, I smiled. You're probably right. Later that night, while he slept, I went downstairs barefoot, like a thief in my own home. I opened the linen closet and pulled out the router. Just like I suspected, Madeline had installed a little black device on top of it. A signal jammer. That's why my calls hadn't gone through. That's why my voice wasn't heard. I took photos of it. Then I did something no one expected a senile old woman to do. I searched online how to install hidden security cameras. The next morning, I called my niece, Laurel. She's 28, a tech whiz who thinks the sun rises and sets on TikTok. I told her I wanted help installing some baby cams, just for peace of mind. She came by that weekend. Said hi to Gregory, gave Madeline a long, judgmental stare. I adored her for that, and helped me set up 3 mini cameras. One in the living room lamp. One in the kitchen flower vase. And the third? In the guest bathroom vent, right outside the study where Gregory and Madeline always whispered. By Sunday night, I had footage. Clear as day. Madeline pouring something into my tea while I was upstairs. Gregory hesitating. Her whispering, it's just a light sedative. She's fine. Him nodding. Her kissing his cheek. I watched that clip 3 times before I could breathe again. So this was how they'd do it. Slowly. Quietly. They'd turn my world inside out until the only option left was a care home. And then, Madeline would step in, comfort Gregory, and marry him. His wealth, his entire $14 million estate, would pass right into her manicured hands. But they underestimated me. I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight. The beautiful woman next door had declared war on me. But she forgot, I was raised by a war widow. And I don't lose. I woke that morning with a fire in my belly and a smile on my lips. It wasn't joy, no, it was something darker. Cold, calculating satisfaction. I had footage now. I had names, timestamps, voices. But more than that, I had clarity. For weeks, Madeline and Gregory had tried to turn me into a walking ghost. But I wasn't drifting anymore. I was anchored. I was done doubting my sanity. Done playing nice. And now it was time to see what else the serpent next door had slithered into. My first step was simple: get close. I invited Madeline over for tea. Yes, I invited her. When I called, she paused, probably wondering if I was onto her. But then she giggled her way through the phone. Of course, Helen. I'd love to. She showed up in a silk blouse, tight trousers, and that overdone perfume I'd come to associate with lies. How are you feeling, darling? She cooed. I offered her a cup with my most brittle smile. Oh, much better. I think the fog is lifting. Her eyes twitched. Just slightly. A microsecond of doubt. "That's wonderful," she said slowly, stirring her tea, her own cup, because I'd switched them at the last minute, just to watch her hands. Just to make her think. I leaned in. "Gregory says you've been helping with his charity paperwork lately." She perked up. "Yes, just odds and ends. Your husband's a brilliant man, but spreadsheets give him hives." I nodded, pretending to laugh. "He's lucky to have someone so organized." I watched her chest rise with pride. That was Madeline's fatal flaw. She underestimated women who wore cardigans and read murder mysteries. 3 days later, I got a surprise in the mail. A pale lavender envelope slipped in between the bills. No return address. I opened it with trembling fingers, and there it was. A wedding invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Gregory Mayweather and Madeline Jameson." I stopped breathing. The date? 3 weeks from now. The location? A private vineyard just outside of town. The guest list? Small, intimate, trusted friends only. And the envelope wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Gregory's assistant, who lived 2 doors down, but had clearly gotten mixed up in the mail. That's how I knew. They weren't even planning to tell me. Not until the ink dried on a psychiatric evaluation and the movers came to take me to Maple Oak Senior Living. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the invitation clutched in one hand, the security footage on loop in the other. Rage pulsed under my skin, but not the kind that screams. No, this rage plans. And that night, I started drafting a plan with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a widow who's buried all her tears. The first part was simple: build my arsenal. I copied the footage to a flash drive. Then another. Then another. I mailed one to Laurel, my niece, and told her to hold it until I said otherwise. The second, I stashed in my bra drawer. The third, I kept in a locket I hadn't worn in years. Next, I documented every financial discrepancy I could find in Gregory's files. I knew his passcode. After all, I set it up for him 5 years ago, wife 123. I found invoices to Madeline's name, donations made in her honor, mysterious charges to luxury boutiques she frequented. And worst of all? A brand new joint account opened in both their names. He hadn't just been tricked, he was being bled dry. But Gregory was innocent. Foolish. Lonely. Madeline had whispered enough poison into his ears to rot a forest. He was following love, or what he thought was love. I had to believe that. Because if I didn't, I'd have to admit I married a man capable of selling me for a prettier version of himself. The next day, I played the final act of the helpless wife. I told Gregory the first wanted to go stay at Maple Oak, just for a tour. "Maybe it is time," I murmured, eyes wide with false fear. He hesitated, then kissed my temple. "I just want you to be safe, Helen." That was his answer to everything. He drove me there himself, hand on my knee, humming along to the radio like he hadn't just buried a 31-year marriage in the trunk. Maple Oak was bright, cheery, filled with the scent of soup and hopelessness. But I played the part. I asked questions. I smiled at the nurse. I nodded along when she said they had a lovely memory care unit. I even let Gregory hold my hand and say, "See? Isn't this nice?" He was trying to do the right thing. He didn't know he was playing into her trap. But I did. That night, I called Laurel. "I need your help," I said. "What kind of help?" she asked, instantly alert. "I need a projector. And a way to make a room full of rich liars watch the truth." She didn't ask another question. Because that's the thing about smart women. We don't scream. We stage. And I was about to turn their vineyard wedding into the scene of a public execution. 3 weeks. That was all the time I had to bring a wolf to her knees and wake my husband from his lovesick delusion. Every day, I moved carefully, no sudden shifts, no raised suspicions. Gregory still thought I was confused but harmless, drifting gently into the sunset of my life. And Madeline? She was busy planning her dream wedding with a man she didn't love and a fortune she hadn't earned. I watched from the sidelines, pretending to grow dimmer, while inside, I sharpened every blade I had, metaphorical and otherwise. Laurel came through for me in every possible way. She ordered a high-lumen mini projector online, one that could fit in a purse but fill a room with sound and color. We loaded it with everything: the kitchen footage, the pill swaps, the hallway whispers, the financial transfers. And then I asked her for one more thing, something strange. "Can you edit the clips together?" I asked. "Make it one continuous video, like a short documentary?" She blinked. "You want me to edit a wedding exposé?" "Exactly," I said. "With titles, timestamps, and, if you can swing it, some dramatic music." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "Auntie," she whispered, "I think you might be my new hero." I placed the projector in my old makeup case, tucked between foundation I hadn't worn in years and a bottle of perfume that hadn't been touched since before the lies began. Then I took the flash drive and sealed it in the locket Gregory had given me on our 20th anniversary. It used to hold our wedding photo. Now it held truth. The wedding day came too soon. It was one of those golden afternoons, sunlight pouring like syrup over every surface, wind gently stirring the vines at White Heather Vineyard. I arrived alone, dressed in a muted lavender dress with pearls at my throat and that locket gleaming like a secret weapon. I wasn't invited. But I didn't need an invitation to reclaim what was mine. I watched from a distance as guests arrived, rich, tanned, oblivious people, sipping champagne and complimenting Madeline on her natural beauty and elegant taste. She was radiant in white, of course. She always liked white. It made her look pure. She stood beside Gregory under a floral arch that probably cost more than my old car, touching his arm possessively, laughing too loudly, blinking like the spotlight was her birthright. He looked nervous. Maybe even guilty. But not aware. Not yet. I waited until the music swelled. Until the officiant cleared his throat. Until every eye turned forward and the world hushed with expectation. And then I walked down the center aisle. People gasped. Some whispered. Madeline's jaw slackened slightly. Gregory blinked twice, his mouth forming my name but not releasing it. I didn't stop until I stood directly between them and the officiant. I turned, raised my hand, and said, "Before anyone says I do, I think you should see what was done." I opened my makeup case. Pulled out the projector. Clicked it on. The first clip played on the wall behind the altar, Madeline in my kitchen, tilting a teacup and sprinkling in white powder. The second, her whispering in Gregory's ear, "She's your past, Greg. I'm your future." The third, their bank account, her name right beneath his. And then the final one, the door to my bedroom locking from the outside, a clear shadow moving past the crack of light. There was no music. No need. The silence of the audience was thunderous. Madeline's face transformed. From shock to denial to rage. "She's lying," she shrieked. "She's editing this is fake. You people don't understand, she's sick. She's senile." But no one believed her. Not anymore. A woman from the back row stood up and said, "I'm a nurse." "That's lorazepam in that cup." A man in a gray suit added, "And that's elder abuse." "I'm calling the police." Gregory looked at me. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he saw me. "Helen," he whispered. I turned to him. "You were going to put me away, Greg. Lock me up while she took my name, my place, my home. You thought you were doing the right thing. But you were doing it with your eyes closed." He looked down, shame blooming across his face like a bruise. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I didn't know what she was doing." Madeline tried to run. But two men stopped her. One pulled out a badge. "You're under arrest for attempted fraud, poisoning, and elder abuse," he said calmly. "You have the right to remain silent." She screamed the whole way down the aisle. "And me?" I stood there, locket still warm in my hand, breathing in the air like it was the first I'd ever tasted. The wedding was ruined. The flowers wilted. The guests horrified. And I had never felt more alive. The vineyard emptied out faster than a sinking ship. Guests scattered, murmuring apologies and excuses, their champagne flutes still half full, their faces ghost-white with shock. A wedding turned into a crime scene isn't something people stay to toast. The sun had dipped just enough to throw long shadows over the lawn, and I stood there, alone, triumphant, stunned by my own steadiness. But the hardest part hadn't begun yet. That came when Gregory looked at me not with hatred or rage, but guilt. He walked toward me slowly, his tie slightly askew, his face pale. The man I married had always been sure of himself, decisive, proud, charming in that southern gentleman sort of way. But now he looked lost. Like a child who had just watched his house burn down with all his toys inside. "Helen," he said softly. "Just my name. No explanations. No defense." I stared at him for a long moment. "How long?" I asked. He blinked. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head. "How long were you planning to send me away? How many more weeks before you had the moving van at the door, my name erased, your hand in hers at the altar?" He rubbed his face, ashamed. I didn't plan it that way. I swear. At first, I thought you really were forgetting things. The stove, the purse in the fridge, the confusion. Maddie said she noticed, too. I was scared for you." He stepped closer. "But I never wanted to hurt you, Helen." I laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "You didn't want to hurt me. But you stood there while she dosed my tea, while she manipulated every step, and you said nothing. You kissed her. You opened a bank account with her. And you believed her over me." Gregory looked down at the grass. "I didn't know she was doing that. I thought I was losing you. I thought you were slipping away. She made me believe I had to protect you from yourself. She was poisoning me," I snapped. "You were protecting me straight into an institution." There was a long silence. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, getting closer. The officers who had cuffed Madeline earlier were now speaking with vineyard security, collecting witness statements. A couple of caterers whispered nearby, still holding trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres. Gregory sighed. "I was lonely, Helen. You were distant. Distant for a long time." I blinked hard. That was the moment that cracked me. "You think I was distant?" My voice was quiet now, but sharp. "Gregory, I was grieving my sister. I was in pain. I was going through late-night panic attacks and memory lapses because I was being poisoned. And you were too blind, too dazzled by Madeline's hair and hips, to see that your wife was dying in her own house." His face crumbled. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I see that now. I got tricked. I got used. And I almost ruined your life." I folded my arms across my chest. "You did ruin my life, Gregory. You just didn't finish the job." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar velvet box. My breath caught. "It was supposed to be part of the vows," he said, slowly opening it. Inside was a new wedding band, gold with a tiny string of rubies, my birthstone. I was going to give this to her. But it doesn't belong to her. It never did. I stared at the ring. Part of me wanted to scream and slap it from his hand. Another part wanted to collapse into his arms and sob until the anger melted. But I stood still. "You don't get to fix this with jewelry." "I know. You don't get forgiveness just because you feel guilty." "I know that too." He slipped the ring back into his pocket. "Then let me earn it. I'll testify. I'll tell the police everything I know. I'll return every cent from that joint account. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm still the man you married." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I fell in love with. Not the foolish one. Not the weak one. But the man who used to hold me while I cried over my father's funeral. The one who used to dance with me in the kitchen barefoot. The man who used to know better. Start by telling the truth, I said. He nodded. To everyone. Especially yourself. He blinked, tears brimming. I'm sorry, Helen. I truly am. I know. We stood in silence as the police cars pulled away with Madeline in the back seat, her face pressed to the window in stunned, furious disbelief. The beautiful neighbor was no longer a threat. She was a headline waiting to happen. But the man beside me? He was the next chapter. And I wasn't sure how it would end, yet. After the Vineyard debacle, word spread fast. Charleston's society pages didn't need much to feast on, and Madeline's arrest served them a 7-course scandal. Within 24 hours, headlines screamed about the wedding sting at White Heather, and old women at church potlucks whispered my name like I'd risen from the grave. Did you hear? Helen Mayweather's not crazy after all. Poor thing, did you see the footage? And that Madeline? Always knew there was something behind those lashes. But gossip never mattered to me. What mattered was walking back into my own house. It was strange. Gregory tried to clean it up before I got home, wiped counters, fluffed pillows, even lit the lavender candle I used to burn before bed. But the air still held her perfume. Like poison in the vents. I walked through each room slowly, touching things with a kind of reverence. Not because they were valuable, but because they were mine. The sofa where I used to read in the afternoon. The ceramic hen cookie jar that hadn't held cookies since 2003. The photo of our trip to Paris, me in that wide sun hat, Gregory in his too-tight blazer, both of us smiling like the world would never change. Now, everything had. Gregory followed me like a shadow, saying little, not touching anything. He had moved into the guest room, unprompted. Good. That was the one decision he didn't mess up this month. Do you want tea? He asked as I entered the kitchen. I turned slowly, my voice even. Not unless you're the one drinking it first. He flinched. Right. Sorry. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not even close. But I was ready to take back control. And that started with reclaiming every corner of my home. I changed all the locks, reset the security code, canceled the housekeeper Madeline hired, and had a tech crew come sweep the place for hidden devices. They found one small audio recorder, tucked behind the fireplace mantel. Madeline had probably placed it there weeks ago. Laurel came by the next day with a grin so wide it nearly broke her face. I brought bagels and moral victory, she said. Which do you want first? Both, I said, and we hugged tighter than we had in years. We spent the afternoon going through the footage one last time. We gave digital copies to the police, the lawyers, and even the media. Madeline's attorney tried to claim it was all fabricated, but the timestamps, fingerprints, and medication analysis made that defense crumble like soggy cake. She was being charged on multiple counts: elder abuse, attempted fraud, criminal drugging. Her bail hearing was a disaster. No one in that courtroom wanted to believe a woman so polished could be so cruel, but when you watch someone spike a teacup while whispering how soon they'll take everything you own, it's hard to see innocence. And Gregory? He was cooperating. He met with the detectives. Turned over financial records. Told the truth, raw and unvarnished. Not because I asked. But because he owed it. I watched him try. He stopped wearing the expensive cufflinks she gave him. Cancelled the car lease she set up under his name. He even started cooking again, badly, I'll admit. But still. There was an apology in every burnt omelette and awkward cup of coffee. One morning, about a week later, he knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it, arms crossed, unsure. I'm heading to therapy, he said. You were right. I didn't see what was in front of me. I didn't listen to the woman who's always had my back. I need to fix whatever made me that blind. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I nodded. Good. He didn't ask for more. Just left. And somehow, that quiet departure said more than 1,000 apologies. That afternoon, I stood on the porch with a cup of untouched coffee, watching the neighbor's house across the street. It had been empty for days. Madeline's things had been hauled out in boxes marked evidence. Her garden was overgrown, her shutters loose. The house looked stripped of its lies. Hollow. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. But not defeated. Because there's a strange kind of peace that comes when you survive something designed to break you. When you wake up, not only knowing the truth, but knowing you never stopped knowing it. They tried to convince me I was vanishing. Instead, I became the one thing they couldn't erase. Myself. The hardest part of survival isn't the fight, it's the quiet that comes after. The morning silence when no one's poisoning your tea. The afternoon hours when the front door doesn't creak open with betrayal in heels. That kind of quiet can feel unfamiliar, even frightening. It had only been a week since the wedding disaster, but every day felt like I was learning how to breathe again. Not just because I'd survived, but because I had to relearn who I was outside of the lies they'd wrapped around me. That's why I went to the attic. It had always been my space. Tucked away above the noise of the world, filled with dusty memories and forgotten bits of my life. Gregory never came up here, said it made his allergies flare. But I loved the smell of old wood and mothballs, the uneven floorboards creaking like ghosts remembering stories. I opened the trunk in the far corner, the one with the brass latch that always stuck a little on the left. Inside were photographs, letters, fabric scraps from old quilting projects, even the college ID I'd kept from 1976, when I was still Helen Green, not Helen Mayweather. I smiled at it. The eyes in that photo were bright, fearless, untouched by betrayal. And then I found the mirror. It was small, oval-shaped, with tarnished silver edges and a handle shaped like ivy vines. My grandmother's mirror. I hadn't looked into it in years. Maybe because I knew it wouldn't lie. Not like Gregory. Not like Madeline. Not like the reflection in our grand marble bathroom downstairs, where everything gleamed but nothing felt real. I lifted it, angled it toward my face. There I was. Wrinkles, yes. Time had etched its story in the corners of my eyes and the edges of my mouth. But there was something else, something stronger than time. A look of knowing. Of survival. Of strength not given, but earned. I whispered to the glass, "You still see me, don't you?" And I swear, that mirror answered me in its silence. Later that day, I took my first walk outside alone. I passed neighbors who gave me odd looks, some sympathetic, some curious, some pretending not to look at all. Word had spread, of course. I was the woman who'd stopped a wedding. Who exposed a snake in designer shoes. Who turned senile suspicion into courtroom evidence. I didn't mind the stares. What I minded was the pity. As I reached the corner flower shop, Mrs. Beatrice, the owner, stepped out. "Helen," she called gently. "You need anything? I've got fresh daffodils. Or some of those roses Gregory always liked." I paused. Looked her dead in the eyes. "He used to like roses. I prefer things with thorns." She blinked, then laughed awkwardly. "Well, you let me know if you want to talk." "I will," I said. But I wouldn't. I didn't need whispers in the aisles of my life anymore. I needed action. That night, Gregory tried again. He left a handwritten note under my door. "Helen, there are no excuses. Only regrets. I was weak. I was stupid. But never unloving. I let someone else write lies into the story of us, and I stood by as they poisoned the ending. But I'm not giving up. If you'll let me, I'd like to earn back my place, not as your husband, but as someone worthy of your forgiveness." Greg, I stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't enough. But it was honest. And that mattered. I slipped it back into the envelope and placed it inside the drawer of my nightstand, not because I forgave him. but because part of me didn't want to throw it away. Not yet. The following morning, I sat in the garden and clipped away the dead leaves from the lavender bush. One by one. Gentle but firm. That's what healing is, isn't it? Snipping away the rot, until something new can grow. And I was beginning to grow again, inch by painful inch. But something inside me knew, this wasn't the end. Madeline may have been arrested. Gregory may have awakened. But the past has claws. And sometimes, it comes back when you least expect it. It was just after sunset when the doorbell rang, a soft, single chime that sliced through the quiet like a blade. I wasn't expecting anyone. Gregory was still out at his therapist's, and Laurel had texted that she'd be traveling to Savannah for a few days. I hesitated. It had been weeks since I'd opened the door without knowing exactly who was on the other side. Ever since Madeline, I didn't like surprises. Still, I stepped forward, pulled the curtain back, and peeked through the narrow glass panel. It was a man. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Tidy beard, leather notebook in hand, wearing a camel-colored blazer. He looked official. I opened the door, but kept the chain on. Yes? Mrs. Helen Mayweather, he asked, his tone polite but practiced. That's me. He held up a badge. Detective Thomas Dyer, Charleston Police Department. I'm working the Jameson case. May I have a word? I studied him for a moment. Real badge. Calm eyes. No twitching or nerves. He wasn't playing a part, he was the real thing. I unlatched the chain and opened the door. Come in, I said, stepping aside. But I don't have any more damning footage, if that's what you're hoping. He gave a brief smile. No, ma'am. I've seen all I need. Frankly, your evidence blew half our case wide open. We're building a strong one thanks to you. I led him into the sitting room and motioned toward the chair Gregory used to read in before this entire nightmare unfolded. Would you like tea? I asked. He held up a hand. No need, thank you. I won't take much of your time. He flipped open his notebook and clicked a pen. I just need to clarify a few things. Small inconsistencies in statements. My body tensed. Inconsistencies? Yes. Nothing to worry about, he said quickly. But, you mentioned in your report that Madeline had been tampering with your prescriptions. You had physical samples of altered pills? I nodded. I flushed the ones I suspected. But I photographed them. Dated everything. You have those photos. We do, he confirmed, flipping pages. But Gregory stated that he was never aware of any tampering. That she never admitted drugging you in his presence. I narrowed my eyes. He heard her say it. He was standing right there when she called it a sedative. He looked up. Is that on the footage? My mouth opened, then paused. No. That particular whisper wasn't on tape. The angle had missed it. I remembered now, he'd left the room too quickly, right after she said it. The microphone hadn't picked it up. It's not, I said slowly. But I remember it clearly. Detective Dyer nodded, scribbled a note. I believe you, ma'am. But I have to cover every angle. We have Madeline's voice on tape admitting intent, but proving Gregory knew is harder. Legally. I stared at the patterned rug beneath my feet. He was complicit, I whispered. He may not have poured the poison, but he held the cup. I don't disagree, he said. But whether a jury would? That's the challenge. I looked up at him sharply. Are you telling me Gregory could walk away from this without a charge? He sighed. Unless we can prove knowledge or participation beyond a reasonable doubt, yes. That's how the system works. I folded my hands tightly in my lap. So the man who stood by while I was drugged, isolated, and nearly locked away, he gets to chalk this up as a mistake? He's cooperating, the detective said carefully. And technically, that helps your case. But I thought you should know, if you're seeking justice through the courts, the punishment might be uneven. I gave a dry, bitter smile. Of course it will be. He closed the notebook gently. You've been through enough, Mrs. Mayweather. You did more than most could. You're not a victim anymore. Don't worry, I said. I know exactly who I am now. After he left, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about Gregory's note, still tucked in my drawer. I thought about that wedding ring he never got to give Madeline. I thought about the fact that even now, the world was ready to forgive a man for being gullible, but not ready to believe a woman when she said, I was not crazy. Maybe Gregory wouldn't go to jail. Maybe he'd walk free, still bathed in apologies. But I didn't need the law to serve justice. Because the one thing Madeline taught me, accidentally, was this: the most powerful revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's simply never looking at someone the same way again. And that's exactly what Gregory would face. Every single day. A week passed. Then 2. Gregory continued trying, quietly, humbly, like a man planting seeds and praying for rain. He cooked dinners he knew I wouldn't eat, folded laundry before I could touch it, left apology notes beneath my coffee mug each morning like penitent love letters. But there was a glass wall between us now, and no matter how many times he tapped against it, I wasn't ready to open the door. The court date was set. Madeline had pleaded not guilty, of course, her lawyer claiming she had acted out of concern, that the video was taken out of context. It would be months before a trial, but she was denied bail, held in custody after the judge reviewed the footage of her drugging me. Justice, slow as molasses, was moving, but it was moving. Still, something didn't sit right. It gnawed at me in the quiet hours of dawn, when the air felt thick and time dragged like a limp dog. And then I found it. The box was on the top shelf of the garage, hidden behind Gregory's old golf trophies and a pile of unused Christmas lights. I don't know what drew me to it that morning. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. The cardboard had no label, but the handwriting on the corner was unmistakable, Madeline's cursive, delicate and sharp. I pulled it down with shaking hands. Inside were pieces of her life, at least the version she curated. Old photographs of her posing beside different men. Notes. Receipts. Passports. 2 passports. Different names. Same face. I sat on the concrete floor, heart thudding, flipping through paper after paper. One ID read Madeline Grace Jameson. The other? Elise Marin Dubois. French nationality. A completely different birth date. A different city. Even her age was different by almost 10 years. And then I found the photo that made my mouth go dry. Gregory. With her. But the photo was from 7 years ago. He stood beside her at a business conference in D.C., arm loosely around her shoulders, both of them holding champagne glasses. She looked different, darker hair, slimmer frame, but it was her. I stared at the photo for a long time. 7 years ago. That wasn't a recent meeting. That wasn't a sudden temptation. That was history. So he had known her. Long before she was our neighbor. Long before I started forgetting the stove or misplacing my things. I stood up too quickly, the room tilting for a second. My knees felt weak, but not from fear. From rage. I stormed into the house, box clutched in my arms, and found Gregory in the kitchen, chopping carrots like it was Sunday and we were still some normal couple from a magazine. I dropped the box on the counter. He looked up. Helen, what, 7 years, I said. My voice was so cold it made the window glass rattle. You knew her 7 years ago. His knife hit the cutting board with a clatter. His face went pale. Helen, wait. I didn't, I pulled out the photo. Slammed it down. Don't lie. He stared at it. Stared at her face. At his own. His mouth opened but no words came out. For the first time since this all began, he was truly speechless. "I thought you were tricked, Gregory," I whispered. "I thought she slid into our lives and seduced you like some serpent in silk. But this?" I shook the photo in his face. "This means she didn't find you. You found her." His lips trembled. "It was a conference. I didn't know she'd move here. I didn't know she'd show up next door, but when she did, you recognized her," I cut in. "Didn't you?" He swallowed. Hard. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavier than grief. "Did you two have an affair?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "No. We flirted. Maybe I thought about it. But I swear, Helen, it never got physical back then. I didn't even think she remembered me." "You're lying." "I'm not," he cried. "I never touched her. Not until she moved here. And even then, it was small. Subtle. She was charming. I was bored. And you were distant." "There it is again," I hissed. "Distant. That's your excuse for betrayal?" "I was stupid," he whispered. "But I didn't bring her into our life. I didn't plan it." I stared at him, tears stinging my eyes. "But when she came, you let her stay. You let her come into my home. You let her put her fingers on my teacup and tell you I was losing my mind. You didn't just fail to stop her, you handed her the rope." He collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Helen." I stood there, hands clenched. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a history of betrayal. He knew her. He lied about it. And worse? He let her rewrite the script and make me the villain in my own home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the box beside me, the photo in my lap, and watched the stars as they flickered in and out of sight. I didn't know where our marriage stood anymore. I didn't know if I could live with a man who had known the enemy all along, and still let her in. But I did know this: Madeline hadn't come into our lives by accident. She had been playing a long game. And Gregory? He had been a pawn long before he ever realized there was a board. I didn't speak to Gregory the next day. Not a word. Not when he set the breakfast table with my favorite jam, not when he lingered near the hallway like a teenager waiting for a scolding, not even when he softly asked, "Are we okay?" from behind my door. We were not okay. We were miles from it. The kind of miles that don't get crossed with apologies. The kind that require truth, repentance, and time, maybe more time than either of us had left. I spent most of the day at Laurel's place. She didn't ask questions when I showed up at her porch with the cardboard box under my arm and exhaustion in my bones. She just wrapped me in a hug and poured me a glass of something cold. We spread the contents of Madeline's secret life across her dining table: IDs, receipts, letters from men who sounded like sugar-drenched idiots, even a brochure from a private rehab clinic in New Orleans where she'd apparently stayed under yet another name. "She's a chameleon," Laurel muttered, turning over one of the passports. "She must have been conning men like Gregory her whole life. And honestly, they probably lined up for it." I gave a bitter laugh. She knew exactly how to make men feel like gods. And once they were drunk on it, she'd crawl inside their lives and drain them dry. "And Uncle Greg?" Laurel asked softly. "You think he was just her next wallet?" I didn't answer right away. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Had he been a fool, or a partner? When I finally spoke, my voice was thin. "I think he started as a fool. But at some point, he stopped being blind. And he just looked the other way." Laurel nodded slowly, then reached for a manila folder. "This came in yesterday, by the way. I had my friend from the courthouse pull Madeline's record. She opened it, and that's when I saw it. 3 prior arrests. All sealed. One in California, one in Texas, and one in South Carolina. Each under a different name. each involving charges that sounded familiar: fraud, identity theft, elder manipulation. She'd done this before. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. Why wasn't this in the police report? I asked. Because sealed records don't show up in standard background checks, Laurel explained. She must have cut a deal. Or the victims didn't press charges. Maybe they were too embarrassed. I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding again, not from fear, but fury. And now she's playing the victim again. Pretending she was trying to help a fragile old woman. Laurel leaned forward. Aunt Helen, what if she planned this whole thing years ago? What if moving in next door wasn't a coincidence? What if she tracked Gregory down after that conference? That thought hit like ice water down my spine. Because it fit. Too well. She already had his trust. She knew his wealth. His business. His habits. All she had to do was slide into place, like a puzzle piece you didn't realize was missing. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. She didn't fall into our lives. She hunted us. And Gregory had invited her in like a child brings home a snake, convinced it's a ribbon. That night, when I returned home, he was waiting for me in the kitchen. The same kitchen where so much of the slow betrayal had begun. He stood when I walked in, eyes full of apology. I found her box, I said flatly, setting it on the table. I know about DC. I know she wasn't a stranger. I know you've been lying, maybe not about everything, but enough. He looked down at the table. You're right. I knew her. I recognized her the day she moved in. But I didn't say anything because I was ashamed. We'd only met briefly. There was flirting, yes. She gave me her card. I never called. But when she showed up on our street, I was curious. And flattered. I didn't think she'd come after me. Not really. You were wrong, I said. He nodded. So wrong. She has 3 sealed arrests, I said coldly. You weren't her first. You were just the latest. His face paled. I didn't know. But you let her stay, I snapped. Even after she started whispering doubts in your ear. Even when she suggested I needed rest. Even when I was unraveling and you refused to see the thread she was pulling. He covered his face with both hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I said. You don't. He dropped his hands slowly, eyes raw. But I want to help. In any way I can. I want to fix what I broke. I stared at him. This man I'd married. This man I no longer recognized. And yet, there was something honest in his brokenness now. Something that hadn't been there before. You want to help? I said. Then testify. Not just against Madeline, but against yourself. Tell the court what you ignored. What you dismissed. Tell them you were complicit in the abuse of your own wife. He didn't flinch. Okay, he whispered. I will. And that's when I realized something else. He had been a pawn. But the difference now was that he finally knew it. And pawns that wake up? Sometimes they stop following orders. Sometimes they fight back. The courtroom was cold. Not just in temperature, but in the way all public institutions seem to drain warmth from your skin the second you enter. Even the pew-like benches were unforgiving, their wood hard and slick beneath me as I sat in the second row behind the prosecution's table. Laurel was beside me, a quiet force of comfort. Gregory sat 3 rows back, at my request. I didn't want him next to me, not yet. Not when every inch of this room still pulsed with betrayal. Madeline entered like a fallen star. Dressed in a soft gray suit with her hair pinned into a modest chignon, she looked more like a grieving widow than a woman on trial for poisoning her neighbor. She didn't look at me, not once. But her lawyer did. A short, pinched man with slicked hair and eyes like dull marbles. He had already filed motions to dismiss the video as circumstantial. They were building a defense around misunderstood intentions, and it made my stomach twist. When the judge entered, the room stood. When he sat, it was like the world braced for impact. The prosecution began with the obvious, the video footage. They played the clips again for the jury, Madeline dropping pills into my tea, whispering to Gregory, referencing my deteriorating state, chuckling in the kitchen while I napped upstairs. Her attorney objected to every third word, but the judge let most of it in. The footage was damning. There was no way around that. But then came the part one hadn't prepared for. Gregory. They called him as a witness. He took the stand slowly, hands folded tight in his lap, mouth tense. I watched him closely, trying to ignore the pounding in my ears. He was under oath now. There would be no more careful omissions. No more half-truths. The prosecutor stepped forward. Mr. Mayweather, can you tell the court how long you've known the defendant, Madeline Jameson? Gregory cleared his throat. 7 years. We met briefly at a business conference in Washington, D.C. You did not disclose this relationship when she moved in next door to you and your wife? No, Gregory said, voice low. I didn't. Why? He hesitated. Because I was ashamed. I'd been flattered by her back then. Nothing happened, but when she reappeared, I didn't want my wife to know. And when your wife began experiencing what she described as confusion, forgetfulness, and disorientation, did you suspect that Mrs. Jameson may have been involved? No, Gregory admitted. At first, I truly thought Helen was declining. Madeline kept reinforcing that. She said she was concerned that Helen might hurt herself. And did you ever see Madeline drug your wife? Gregory swallowed. Yes. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Even I froze. You saw her drug your wife, and you did nothing? The prosecutor asked sharply. Gregory nodded. I was scared. I told myself it was just a mild sedative. That it would help Helen rest. But that's not what it was. I see that now. Did you ever confront her? No. I believed her when she said it was for the best. I let her convince me that institutionalizing my wife was the only option. My throat tightened. And now? Gregory looked directly at me for the first time. Now I know I failed the woman I promised to protect. I know I stood by while she was violated, gaslit, and nearly erased. And I will never forgive myself for that. Silence again. But this time it was thick with something else. Truth. The defense cross-examined, of course. Tried to paint Gregory as confused, as part of a larger emotional crisis. Tried to suggest he and I were staging a revenge story out of marital spite. But it didn't stick. Not with the footage. Not with the receipts. Not with the quiet shame that clung to Gregory's every word. The day ended with Madeline refusing to take the stand. Her lawyer rested his case with a final, desperate plea for reasonable doubt. But the jury? They weren't buying it. As we left the courthouse that day, the media swarmed the steps. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters called my name. Mrs. Mayweather, do you feel vindicated? Do you blame your husband? What do you want to happen to Madeline Jameson? I didn't stop walking. I didn't owe the world my anger. I'd already paid enough in silence. But I did glance at one reporter with a quiet smile and said, I just want the truth to win. And it's finally starting to. Gregory was behind me on the stairs, but he didn't speak. He just followed. For the first time, I realized something. He wasn't trying to lead anymore. He was waiting to be invited. And that? That was a start. By the time we returned home that night, the house felt different. Not haunted, no, Madeline's presence had been exorcised long ago, but unsettled. Like everything inside had shifted a few inches while we were away, as if the walls had absorbed too much betrayal to sit quietly anymore. I stood in the foyer for a long time, my purse still on my shoulder, my hands unmoving. Gregory hovered behind me, silent, as if afraid to ask permission to enter the space he once called home. "You can go in," I said without turning. He didn't move right away. Then I heard the soft shuffle of his shoes on the tile, and the familiar creak of the hallway floorboard near the kitchen. He was back inside. But nothing about it felt whole. I went upstairs alone and stood in front of our bedroom door. For 31 years, that room had held every part of our life together: laughter, arguments, anniversaries, illnesses, reconciliations. But now it was a monument to something cracked. The mattress still had a faint dent on his side. His cologne still clung to the edge of the closet. But the bed felt like it belonged to strangers. I didn't open the door. Instead, I turned toward the guest room where I'd been sleeping for weeks and closed myself inside. Downstairs, I heard Gregory moving around, opening cabinets, maybe looking for something to feel useful again. I imagined him standing at the sink, staring out the window like he used to do when waiting for my car to pull into the drive. But I wasn't the same woman he used to wait for. And he wasn't the man who used to wait. The next morning, we passed each other in the hallway like awkward roommates. I made my own coffee. He didn't offer. We exchanged a nod. That was all. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug, staring out the window at Madeline's empty house. The realtor's sign had gone up yesterday: motivated seller. The grass was dying. The curtains were drawn. Her little wind chime, once a cheerful sound that masked poison, now hung broken, one string snapping gently in the breeze. Laurel called just after noon. "She's trying to cut a deal," she said. I stiffened. "What kind of deal?" Her lawyer submitted a proposal to the prosecutor: full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence and sealed details. Sealed? I snapped. After everything she did, they want to bury it? It's standard, Laurel said. Especially if it involves multiple states. She might have other crimes they're not ready to prosecute. The DA might want to keep it clean. I clenched the phone. There's nothing clean about what she did to me. I agree, Laurel said. But I thought you should know before the media spins it into something glossy. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure what was worse, Madeline being acquitted, or Madeline quietly disappearing into some minimum security spa of a prison with a slap on the wrist. I stood from the table and went to the study. The room Gregory used to sit in when he whispered with her. The same room where they planned my undoing. The air still smelled of betrayal. But the desk was clean now. Empty. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the locket. The one that held the flash drive. My weapon. I held it tightly in my palm, then walked it to the fire pit outside. Gregory appeared at the sliding glass door, watching. He didn't ask what I was doing. He knew. I dropped the locket into the flames and watched it blacken, curl, and melt. Not because I was ready to forgive. But because I was done needing the proof. Everyone believed me now. More importantly, I believed myself again. When I came back inside, Gregory was sitting at the dining table with a folder in front of him. He looked up. "I filed for a full forensic audit of my finances," he said. Every account she touched. I want it all cleaned. Transparent. I didn't sit. But I nodded. He opened the folder and handed me a set of documents. A new will. I changed everything. You're the sole beneficiary again. And if anything happens to me, Laurel oversees it. No more secrets. No more loopholes. I stared down at the paper, then back at him. "I don't need your money," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. But it was never about that. And he was right. It wasn't. It was about respect. About truth. About standing beside someone, not above them. Not behind them. Beside. For a moment, we just sat in the silence. Not together, but not apart either. Somewhere between the two. And for the first time since the vineyard, I realized this wasn't the end of us. But it was the end of who we used to be. Whatever came next would have to be built from the bones. In the days that followed, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years: cleaning. Not in the typical dust and vacuum way, but deep cleaning. The kind of cleaning that involved throwing out memories, gutting drawers, peeling open old boxes like wounds. I pulled photo albums from closets and tore out pictures where Madeline had wormed her way into our lives: Easter brunch on the porch, that charity fundraiser she'd volunteered to help host, the backyard barbecue where she wore white and made me look like a shadow in my own home. Each photo I removed, I burned. Not to forget, but to reclaim space. Gregory didn't say a word. He watched, quietly respectful, as I dismantled the web. He even brought me a lighter once, when I ran out of matches. Said nothing. Just set it beside me and left the room. He was learning. One night, I found myself sitting on the bedroom floor, our bedroom, holding a shoebox marked Paris. It was from our 20th anniversary trip. I had almost forgotten it existed. Inside were train stubs, a cafe napkin with his sketch of me, a photo of us on the Pont Alexander III bridge, smiling with wind-blown hair and wine-warmed eyes. That woman in the photo didn't yet know what betrayal felt like. She didn't know how quiet a marriage could become before it began to rot. But she looked real. Like someone I wanted to be again. Gregory walked in, stopping when he saw the box. "I remember that bridge," he said softly. I nodded. "You drew me on a napkin. I made fun of your no skills. You said I made you look like a bird." "You did." He smiled. "So did I." For a breath. Then it passed. "Do you think we can ever get that back?" he asked. I looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. He looked older now. Softer. Smaller. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. "I don't want to go back," I said finally. Back means ignorance. Back means letting snakes into the house because their smiles seem kind. He nodded. "Then where do we go?" I closed the box gently. "We start from the bones. The clean ones." He sat beside me, not touching, just near. "I'll follow your lead." "Good," I said. Because for the first time in 31 years, I'm not walking behind anyone. The next morning, I drove myself to Maple Oak Senior Living. The same place they nearly committed me to. The woman at the front desk smiled brightly and asked, "Are you here for a tour?" "No," I said. "I'm here to give a talk." They had a weekly speaker series, Voices of Resilience, they called it. I told them I wanted to share my story. Not for sympathy. But for warning. For strength. For all the women who've ever doubted their instincts because someone told them they were just tired or just hormonal or just losing it. The room filled with women in knit shawls and quiet eyes. Some were already halfway through forgetting their names. Others were sharper than razors. I stood at the front, cleared my throat, and began. "My name is Helen Mayweather. I'm 70 years old. And not long ago, I was almost erased." I told them everything. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. And then something better than applause, tears. Women lined up to hug me. To thank me. To whisper things like, they said I was crazy, too. My own daughter tried to take everything. I thought I was the only one. But none of us are alone. Not really. Later that night, back home, Gregory was setting the table when I returned. I told him where I'd been. He paused, surprised. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because this part isn't yours," I said gently. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, like a man who finally understood his own limits. We ate in quiet. Not awkward. Not distant. Just quiet. The good kind. The healing kind. And I realized something then: I wasn't rebuilding our marriage. I was rebuilding myself. And if he wanted to be part of that? He'd have to do it with open eyes, open hands, and no more blindfolds. Because I wasn't letting anyone erase me again. Not even him. It was early, just past 5, when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I had gone downstairs to get water and paused without meaning to. The woman looking back at me wasn't dressed, wasn't wearing makeup, and her silver hair was mussed from sleep. But her shoulders were straighter. Her jaw firmer. Her eyes, clear. I touched the glass gently, half expecting it to ripple. But it didn't. That reflection was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt ownership over the face I saw. This was what survival looked like. When I came into the kitchen, Gregory was already there, shirt untucked, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from his shower. He glanced up as I entered but didn't speak. Just poured a second mug of coffee and placed it on the counter near me without asking how I liked it. He remembered. I took a sip, then looked at him. "There's something I want you to see." His brows lifted slightly, wary but open. "Okay." I left him in the kitchen and returned with a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters. Journals. Fragments of a woman I had been before everything got quiet. Before trust turned into background noise. I handed it to him. "These are pages from the year after my sister died," I said. "You always said I became cold. Distant. But I want you to read what I was really going through. So you understand that what you saw wasn't absence. It was survival." He looked down at the folder like it was holy. "I will," he said. "I promise." I nodded. And for the first time, I believed him. Later that afternoon, we received a letter from the district attorney's office. Madeline had officially taken the plea deal. 3 years in a medium security facility, with all prior arrests to be reviewed by a multi-state task force. Her confession was sealed, but our case remained public. Her name would never again appear in a neighborhood registry without someone whispering, "Isn't that the one who?" I sat with that letter for a while, unsure how to feel. 3 years. 3 years for drugging, manipulation, and near total life destruction. 3 years while I spent every day rebuilding myself inch by inch. But then I reminded myself, Madeline lost something too. She lost the game. She lost control. And most importantly, she lost me. Gregory and I took a walk that evening. Just a block or two, nothing dramatic. We passed familiar houses that now seemed unfamiliar in the twilight. One neighbor waved from her porch, her expression soft. I wondered how many people knew what had really happened. How many had suspected but stayed silent? How many smiled at us without ever asking how deep the cracks went? And I didn't care. Let them speculate. I was done explaining. When we reached the corner, Gregory slowed his steps. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking of selling the company." I blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "Retiring. Downsizing. Spending the rest of my time doing something real. Something good." I studied him. Is that a gesture? Or guilt? He met my eyes. Both. But it's also clarity. "Then what would you do with your time?" He smiled, a little sheepish. "I thought maybe we could travel again." I turned my gaze back to the street. "Maybe." He didn't push. He just walked beside me, letting the maybe sit in the air like a promise not yet made. That night, I returned to our bedroom for the first time in weeks. I didn't sleep there. Not yet. But I stood in the doorway, looking at the place where we had built our life, where cracks had formed, but not collapsed. Where laughter and betrayal and forgiveness now shared the same walls. I set a small journal on the nightstand. It was empty. A new one. Because I wasn't just rebuilding. I was rewriting. And the woman in the mirror? She was ready to begin. The journal sat on the nightstand untouched for 3 days. I'd glance at it each morning, fingers brushing the leather cover, and then pull away. Not out of fear, no. But because I knew the moment I cracked it open, I'd be making something permanent. Ink doesn't lie. Words live long after the feelings that birthed them fade. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to see myself on the page again, not just as a victim or a betrayed wife, but as a woman stepping into her own power. That kind of truth demands courage. And courage, I'd learned, is quiet. Patient. It arrives in whispers, not thunder. On the fourth day, I picked up the pen. The first sentence came slow, but strong. Today, I no longer ask for permission to take up space. I wrote until my fingers cramped. Thoughts about Gregory. About Madeline. About the mirror and the fire pit and the way my name had once sounded hollow when spoken by people who didn't see me. But mostly, I wrote about myself. My voice. My presence. My boundaries. Not as an old woman reclaiming lost ground, but as a living force carving new space where no one could shrink me again. Gregory found me at the desk just before dinner. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there watching me, his eyes a mix of pride and guilt and something more honest than either, humility. I booked an appointment, he said finally. With a couples counselor. I looked up from the page. Why? Because I don't want us to rebuild on silence, he said. Not again. Not this time. I nodded. It was the right answer. Not a grand gesture. Not a plea. A practical step. Something rooted in work. In showing up. That evening, we cooked dinner together. Not like before, not in the old rhythm where I did everything and he just poured wine. No, this time he chopped onions while I seasoned the chicken. We bumped elbows. Laughed once when he dropped the pepper grinder into the sauce. It wasn't romance. It was something better. It was real. After dinner, I sat at the piano in the corner of the sitting room, dusty, forgotten. I hadn't played in years. But my fingers remembered. Slowly, gently, I pressed down a chord. Then another. And before I knew it, I was playing the same lullaby I used to hum to myself when Gregory traveled for business. The melody was soft, fragile, but it held. When I looked up, Gregory was watching from the doorway. You remember that one? I asked. He nodded. You used to play it when you thought I was asleep. You were never really listening, I said. I am now. There was no need to respond. The music said enough. Later that night, I opened the bedroom door again. Still didn't sleep there, but I unpacked my things. My books. My robe. My moisturizer. I folded each item gently, as if reminding the room who I was. Gregory's side remained untouched. I wasn't ready for that. But I was claiming mine again. And then came the phone call. It rang just after midnight. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to. A man's voice on the other end. I hope I'm not waking you, Mrs. Mayweather. My name is Aaron Klein. I'm with the Department of Financial Crimes in Austin, Texas. I sat up straight. Yes? We've been tracking a case connected to a woman named Elise Dubois. You may know her as Madeline Jameson. My stomach turned cold. I do. She's tied to a financial fraud ring across 3 states. Your testimony helped reopen several dormant files. We're calling because, well, we think you may have stopped something much bigger than just what happened in Charleston. My throat tightened. She's connected to others? Yes, ma'am. And you might be the only one who stood up to her in time. I blinked. The silence on my end was stunned. We'll be in touch, he said. Thank you for what you did. I hung up and sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at the journal still open on my desk. I thought I was just saving myself. But maybe I'd stopped her from hurting dozens of others. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a wall she couldn't climb. A voice she couldn't silence. A woman who rewrote the ending. I didn't sleep after that phone call. Not out of fear, but from a strange, buzzing awareness that everything I had done, the documenting, the hidden cameras, the public confrontation, had rippled beyond me. Across state lines. Across other women's lives. I sat at the window, watching the stars, feeling something I hadn't felt since before Madeline came into our lives: purpose. The next morning, Gregory noticed the change. I came down the stairs with a robe cinched tight, hair pulled back, journal under my arm. He looked up from the newspaper, surprised, almost wary. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't sleep," I replied, pouring coffee. "A detective from Texas called." His brow furrowed. "Texas?" I nodded. "They're reopening cases tied to her. Turns out Madeline, Elise, whoever she really is, has been running this scheme for years. I wasn't her first. I was just the first to fight." Gregory set down his coffee slowly, as if digesting not just the words, but their weight. "You stopped her." I met his eyes. "We could have stopped her sooner, if you had listened." His jaw twitched. "I know." The air between us was different now. Not hot with anger, not cold with avoidance, but something in between. Heavy. Honest. I turned toward him. "She played on your loneliness. I understand that. But you chose silence. You let me spiral, even when your gut told you something was wrong." He nodded. "I didn't want to believe I could be wrong about someone again. Especially after everything with my brother's will, and that investor who conned me in '09. And so you made me the one who was wrong," I said. "So you wouldn't have to be." He flinched. The truth landed harder than I expected. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know." We didn't say much more that day. But later, I noticed he'd packed up all of Madeline's gifts: the tie clip, the cufflinks, the leather-bound planner she gave him just to stay organized. He placed them in a cardboard box and left it at the edge of the driveway, next to the trash bin. Not hidden in the garage. Not buried in the closet. Thrown out, where the whole world could see. That evening, I walked through the house again, not as a ghost, not as a woman tiptoeing around betrayal, but as the owner of her own space. I lingered by the staircase, the one where I once clutched the railing, dizzy from whatever Madeline had laced in my tea. I stood by the bathroom mirror where my reflection had once seemed like a stranger. I even walked into the study, the room where they whispered about memory care facilities and bank transfers, and opened the window. Let the air in. Every inch of the house still carried the echoes of what happened. But now? Those echoes were mine. I wasn't erasing them. I was reclaiming them. That night, for the first time in weeks, I moved my pillow back to the master bedroom. Gregory was already asleep, or pretending to be. I slipped into bed silently, staring at the ceiling, unsure how I felt. The sheets were clean. The room smelled like lavender again, not perfume. But the distance between us on the mattress was still vast. I didn't reach across it. Not yet. In the morning, I woke before him. I stood over him quietly for a moment, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. There had been so many mornings before Madeline when I used to lie there in love, in peace. And so many mornings after, where I feared the house itself had turned against me. Now, I felt neither fear nor fondness. Just clarity. I grabbed my robe and journal and went downstairs. On the way, I passed by the hallway where Madeline once stood in stilettos, pretending to be my friend. And I paused. Something was on the floor. A torn corner of a card. I picked it up, barely a scrap, but enough to recognize the elegant script. It was a business card. One of hers. Except this one had a different name again. Margot V. St. James, lifestyle consultant. Not Elise. Not Madeline. Margot. Another alias. Another identity. My stomach turned. I took the scrap and taped it into the back of my journal. Not to report it. Not to pursue her. But to remember. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who keep changing masks, and sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who never let the scars make them forget. And I would never forget. The week passed with a strange quiet. Gregory had begun to settle into his new humility like it was a second skin, soft-spoken, helpful, unobtrusive. He no longer tried to impress me with grand gestures or empty apologies. Instead, he showed up in the smallest of ways, folding towels correctly, cleaning out the gutters without being asked, even remembering to water the fern I had nearly let die during the worst of the chaos. But I didn't thank him. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I wasn't ready to make kindness easy again. Some wounds need time to breathe before they can bear the weight of reconciliation. And I was still breathing. Then came the envelope. It was plain. No return address. Delivered by hand, not mail. Slipped through the front door sometime in the early evening while Gregory and I had been out in the garden arguing over whether the lemon tree needed pruning. When we came back inside, it lay waiting on the floor like a coiled snake. I picked it up slowly. My name was written in beautiful, slanted handwriting, delicate, precise, unmistakable. Madeline. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. Dear Helen, you won, didn't you? But don't let that metal around your neck cut into your throat. You were never the victim you claimed to be. You were just the louder one. You exposed me, yes, but not for what I did. For who I reminded you of. There are pieces of you that are darker than anything I ever offered Gregory. Pieces you've buried so deep, even he forgot. But I see them. I always did. That's why you hated me. I won't be sending any more letters. There's nothing left to say. Except this, you're not nearly as innocent as you think you are. I read it 3 times. Slowly. Then folded it and slid it into my journal, right next to the torn business card labeled Margot. Gregory watched me carefully. What was that? Closure, I said, without blinking. But it wasn't. It was something else. She wasn't finished. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old familiar chill crawl up my spine. Not fear. Not anger. But challenge. The kind that creeps in when you realize your story isn't just about survival, but about warfare. And warfare never ends neatly. That night, I didn't speak of the letter. I went to bed early, stared at the ceiling, and thought about the line, "You're not nearly as innocent as you think you are." What did she mean? What was it she thought she saw in me? Did I become like her? Was that what survival had done? I closed my eyes and remembered all the ways I had fought back. The cameras. The deception. The trap I laid at her wedding. The way I'd smiled when she was arrested. The satisfaction that ran through me when she was dragged past stunned guests in handcuffs, her veil caught in her own heel. Was that justice? Or cruelty? And then I realized, maybe it didn't matter. Because in this life, some women are forced to sharpen their softness until it cuts. Madeline may have played her games for years. But I ended them. And if that made me a little like her? So be it. Because the difference was this, I didn't smile while I destroyed people. I only did it when they left me no other choice. At 3 a.m., I rose from bed and walked down to the study. Opened my journal. Turned to a new page. And wrote a single sentence, "She still doesn't understand, monsters are made, not born." And I had been made. Not by choice. But by betrayal. By silence. By love that looked the other way. And if she ever came back? She'd find out just how sharp I'd become. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Not from dread, but from something else. Something colder. Precision. I had always believed revenge made you feel whole again. That once the villain was exposed and the dust had cleared, you could fold yourself back into the life you had before. But there is no folding back. There is only forward, with sharper eyes, and skin that remembers every time it was burned. Gregory was still asleep when I slipped out of bed and walked into the kitchen. I stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, the smell of cinnamon rising like memory. I thought of Madeline's letter again. Her accusations. Her venom. The way she tried to infect me one last time, to whisper that I was just like her. But she was wrong. She always had been. Because I never wanted to take anything from anyone. I only wanted what was mine. That's what separates a monster from a survivor. Intent. And mine had always been simple, to be believed. When Gregory walked in, I handed him his coffee without speaking. He accepted it the same way he had for the last few weeks, with gratitude that bordered on reverence. "I'll go by the bank today," he said. "Close out the last of the joint accounts. I should have done it months ago." "Do it quietly," I said. "I don't need them calling the papers again." He nodded. "Of course." I didn't look at him as I added honey to my bowl, but I felt the question hanging in the air between us. He didn't ask it, but I knew what it was. Are we ever going to be okay again? And the answer? I didn't know. Because I was still deciding who I was now. Not who I used to be as his wife. But who I had become when no one believed me. When my house turned against me. When my name was nearly ripped from my own mind. That afternoon, I visited Laurel. She'd been asking me for days to come help her sort old family boxes in her garage. I hadn't wanted to until now. "I saved something for you," she said with a sly smile, handing me a folder with a purple ribbon. Inside were letters I had written to her as a child. Handwritten notes, birthday cards, and one sheet titled "Advice from Aunt Helen." "You told me," she said, "that if the world ever tried to convince me I was crazy, I should look at who benefits from my silence." I laughed, tears welling behind my eyes. "Smart girl." "No, you were the smart one," she said. "You just forgot it for a while." We talked for hours. About everything. And nothing. Until I finally told her about the letter Madeline sent. About the accusation. She didn't flinch. "She's trying to get one last scratch in before she sinks," Laurel said. "Typical. She couldn't destroy you, so now she wants to haunt you." That word settled heavy in the room. Haunt. And maybe that was true. Because even locked away, Madeline still lived in corners. Still lingered in my tea rituals. Still echoed in Gregory's silences and the way he flinched at loud noises. She wasn't gone. She had become a ghost. And part of me wondered, would she ever truly leave? That night, I returned home and found Gregory in the garden. He was pruning the lemon tree. His movements were careful. Thoughtful. For the first time, I didn't see a man trying to atone. I saw a man waiting. When he came in, he washed his hands, stood in the hallway, and finally asked, "Do you want me to stay here?" It wasn't a plea. It wasn't guilt. It was a question of boundaries. I appreciated that. I met his eyes and answered plainly, "I don't know yet." He nodded, said nothing, and quietly went to the guest room. And that night, for the first time, I slept without fear. Not because I had forgotten. But because I remembered everything. And still chose peace. Even if I hadn't chosen him. The courthouse was quiet the day I returned, not for a trial this time, but for a hearing related to the broader fraud ring Madeline had been part of. They'd asked me to testify again, not as a victim now, but as a witness. And this time I went alone. No Gregory at my side. No Laurel holding my hand. Just me, my journal, and the sharp voice I'd spent a lifetime silencing. The room wasn't as full as the last time. No cameras. No media. Just a few officials, 2 detectives from Texas, a federal prosecutor, and the judge. But it didn't matter how few people were there, because when I stood up, opened my journal, and spoke, I felt the weight of every woman Madeline had ever tried to erase rise with me. "I'm not here to give you new evidence," I said plainly. "You already have what you need. What I'm here to do, is remind you what it looks like when someone decides to believe themselves, even when no one else will. I told them how it began, not with a crime, but with a doubt. A misplaced object. A flicker of confusion that slowly unraveled everything I knew. I told them how Gregory's silence screamed louder than Madeline's lies. How small moments, forgotten birthdays, missing mail, cloudy thoughts, were used as proof that I was no longer myself. I was never crazy, I said, voice steady. I was just being rewritten. The judge listened. The prosecutor took notes. One of the female officers wiped a tear from her cheek. And when I was done, no one clapped. No one needed to. Because some stories don't need applause. They need to be heard. When I left the courthouse, the wind was picking up. Charleston's oak trees bent gently, and the air smelled like rain. But I wasn't worried. I had lived through a storm already. Gregory was waiting for me at home. He stood when I came through the door but didn't say anything. Just looked at me with the same quiet reverence he'd carried ever since the day the lies began to unravel. I spoke today, I said. I know, he replied. I watched the live stream. I raised an eyebrow. You did? He nodded. Every word. There was a pause. A long one. I'm proud of you, Helen. I tilted my head, voice calm. You don't get to be proud of me. He blinked. Not until you learn to be proud of the woman who stood up to you, too. His eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. That night, I made tea. Just for myself. 1 cup. No tricks. No second guessing. Just the simple, sacred act of caring for myself. And as I sat down with my cup and my journal, I knew exactly how I wanted to end my story. Not with revenge. Not with forgiveness. But with truth. Because sometimes, the most powerful victory is living a life no one can question. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to those of you who listened all the way through, who shared your stories in the comments, who reached out and reminded me that I was never alone. If you've ever been silenced, gaslit, or made to feel like you were fading into the background, this story was for you. So please, like, share, subscribe, and tell me, where are you listening from? I want to know which parts of the world my voice is finally reaching. Now, here is how it ends. It happened on a Thursday. Exactly 6 months from the day I exposed Madeline at her wedding. That wasn't, I got a letter in the mail. This time, it was official, Department of Justice letterhead, sealed envelope, my name printed cleanly across the top. I sat down in the sunroom to read it, the lemon tree outside full again, bright yellow orbs catching light like tiny promises. The letter confirmed what I'd already suspected. Madeline had entered a plea in the federal case. No trial. No spectacle. She gave up names, accounts, schemes. Her sentence would now extend to 12 years across 2 states. Multiple victims were coming forward. The woman who once tried to rewrite my story was now just a number in a system, filed, indexed, and forgotten by the very world she tried to charm. But I would never forget. Later that day, I walked through the house, my house, and realized something strange. The air felt still, but not heavy. The walls no longer whispered. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned. Gregory was in the kitchen, prepping dinner again. He had changed. Not in the big, dramatic ways that movies like to pretend people do, but in smaller, humbler ways. He no longer needed praise. He no longer spoke over me. He listened. He volunteered twice a week at the senior center. He sent handwritten apologies to every friend who'd seen him stand by Madeline's side. Not because I asked him to. Because he did. One evening, as we sat together in the garden, watching the sunset bleed orange across the grass, he turned to me with something folded in his hand. I've been carrying this for months, he said. He opened his palm. A wedding band. Not new. Mine. The original. He'd found it in the garage, tucked in an old box, right where Madeline had told him I must have lost it. I stared at it, the gold dulled by dust, but still whole. Still strong. I don't expect anything, he said. I just thought, maybe you'd want it back. I took it. Held it. Then slid it into my pocket. I might, I said softly. Someday. He nodded, saying nothing more. That was all it needed. 2 weeks later, Laurel came by for dinner. We drank wine on the porch, and she asked, "So, what now, Aunt Helen? What's next?" I smiled. I don't know. Maybe I'll finish that memoir. Maybe I'll volunteer. Maybe I'll go to Paris again, alone this time. Just to see how the bridge looks without him standing next to me. She laughed, and I laughed with her. Because the freedom didn't come from revenge. It didn't even come from exposing Madeline. It came from choosing myself. Every day. In every room. With every breath. That night, I opened my journal one last time. Final entry, they tried to write me out of my own life. But I took the pen back. And now, every word is mine. So that's it. That's how the wedding never happened. That's how the beautiful neighbor lost everything. And that's how I, Helen Mayweather, taught the world that some women grow sharper with age, sharp enough to cut through lies, rewrite history, and wear their scars like armor. I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. And I'm still here. Thank you for listening. Now tell me, have you ever had to take the pen back from someone who tried to write you out? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe my channel. Until the next story, stay sharp. Stay loud. And never, never, let anyone decide who you are. Not even the one who said I do.